it's rushed. I realized last lecture was rushed because the glycogen synthesis was the part that was most rushed. I will not have a question about it on the exam. It's highly correlated with the book, so if you're interested in those details where we have the slides, you can look at your book for more information. Most of the lectures will not be rushed. The pace that we're going in terms of the material is consistent with the other teachers of this section of metabolism. There is a lot. So I know last lecture was rushed, but in general, if you're having trouble keeping up, I would suggest you go over the reader and the book before lecture. That way you'll be primed for lecture. If you're keeping up, okay, coming to lecture fresh, you can then fill it in during lecture and then go back to the book with the full lecture afterwards. So you have to decide for yourselves what works best. If you're really feeling lost, I would suggest doing the reading with the reader before you come to class, focusing on the reader slides, okay? Every figure in there is in the book, and in some cases, it could be a slightly different number just from addition changes, but the figure is always there. So today we're moving on to the citric acid cycle, and this is a lecture that's nice because it's totally encompassed within one lecture. It's not extending into a couple, and it builds off the other things that we've been talking about. So to put it in perspective, right, we spent a lot of time on glycolysis. We talked a little bit about fermentation. For your exam, we're not going to be talking about this because we've been focused more on mammals, but you might have a question relating to formation of lactate. But the main thing that happens, right, with glucose to pyruvate is that you actually get oxidation to CO2 and or H2O. And the reason for that is that you have a lot of energy stored in pyruvate and you want to use all of that. So you're using that by generating direct electrons directly to oxygen, and you're recycling NADH and you're getting ATP. And that ATP will be next lecture where it's coupled to oxidative phosphorylation. So another orientation slide, these are the stages of pyruvate oxidation, right? So our whole focus today is here, pyruvate oxidation. So the very first step is actually producing acetyl-CoA. We're going to go into this in some detail. It's very important. And we'll look at acetyl-CoA structure. Just so there's no confusion, the citric acid cycle is also called the TCA cycle, tricarboxylic acid cycle, and the Krebs cycle after the person that discovered it. So any of those are interchangeable. And the whole purpose of it, you can gather from this picture, right, is actually to produce electrons. And those electrons are actually stored as reduced electron carriers, NADH and FADH2, which we talked about in our very first lecture and throughout. Those then go into the electron transport chain to produce ATP. So this we'll be talking about next lecture, and today we're focusing on here and here. So I mentioned that we want to use all of the energy, right, that's stored in pyruvate. So in the very first part of glycolysis, glucose to pyruvate, you're only releasing or as an energy forming molecules, ATP, you're only getting 3% of the energy. The rest of it's stored in pyruvate. And that's why you're then doing this oxidation to then transfer it to these electron carriers to then make a lot of ATP. And all carbon is fed to this cycle is released as CO2, which will go through the reactions. But you have a CO2 being released here, here, and here. And so you have energy also, just to re-emphasize this point, it's all stored as electron carriers. So the very first part is a rate-limiting controlling step, which is the conversion of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. You can also get acetyl-CoA feeding in from fatty acids and amino acids, but we're not talking about that here. So we're just focused on this part of it. So what is acetyl-CoA? So what I'm showing you here is the structure of CoA, coenzyme A. It's a little bit misleading because it's actually not an enzyme, right? But it works with enzymes. So the structure of it is you have your adenine and your ribose, right? But in this case, in addition to the 5-phosphate, right, the diphosphate, right, adenosine diphosphate, here, you have this extra phosphate group. And the extra phosphate group is 3' phosphoadenosine diphosphate. So if it were just ADP, you wouldn't have this group here. So this is specifying this extra phosphate. This pantothenic acid is also referred to as a vitamin. It's a particular structure that's useful in terms of providing, catalyzing these types of reactions where you have, this is really the kind of functional part, you have this thioester, okay? So this SH, this reactive thiol group. And when that's hydrolyzed, you produce, it's actually very irreversible, and it has a very negative delta G. So this is really driving reactions. So if in a perfect world, right, we could just take acetyl or acetate, right, which would be the acetate without the CoA, and we could convert it, right, all down to CO2. But in fact, we're not able to do that chemically. So we have to do some chemical tricks. And one of them is to activate acetyl-CoA by putting on this, to activate acetate by putting on this CoA group. This allows the subsequent reactions to occur, okay? So this is what we're putting on. This would be acetate. So it's an activated form of acetate. So this reaction is actually a really special reaction that's catalyzed the conversion of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. What you need to know is actually just the entering pyruvate and then the products, CO2 and acetyl-CoA, like this, and that it has a really high delta G because of this formation here, so the minus 33.4. So what's happening is we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail because it's such a special enzyme complex. It has 5 cofactors. So it has 3 subunits you'll look at in a minute, and 5 cofactors. So one is the CoA in the reduced form, one is NAD+, one is TPP, which you've been seeing again as a cofactor, thymine pyrophosphate. One is kind of special, we'll look at in a minute, lipoate, and then another that you've been seeing a lot of, which is FAD. So just looking at these, right, you can already begin to have a feeling that probably we're going to have some electron transfer, right, because we have NAD and FAD. Often when you have TPP, you're having CO2 coming off. It's often catalyzing that type of a reaction. And CoA is what we need to put on here in order to then drive this reaction in the next step. So let's look at this. Again, this picture is in your book. You don't need to know the details of every part of this, but I want to just discuss it briefly. So the 3 subunits are colored. Yellow for the pyruvate dehydrogenase. So here, the pyruvate, the CO2 is coming off, and this TPP cofactor, you're actually having this group attached to the TPP cofactor. From here, you go to the second enzyme, the E2, and this is a dihydrolipoyl transacetylase. So what's happening here, it's pretty cool. So this is a case where you have substrate channeling, but instead of making a tunnel, you're actually having this lipoyl group, which is this, right here, and it can go 2 forms. It can be reduced, where you have the 2 H's, or it can be oxidized, where you have a disulfide bond. Did you see disulfide bonds in the first part of the course? Yeah, okay. So there's these 2 forms of it, and another cool thing about it that's very important is that it actually is an extended molecule. It's literally like an arm, and it's what's taking this, it's moving, right, this product to the next active site right here, to the next active site right here. So it's actually not releasing the substrate or the product. It's taking the intermediates and moving it, which is so that's the way it's channeled, is actually because of this arm holding onto it. So in this part, what you do is you have the addition of the CoA to make acetyl-CoA, and you have reduction occurring here, right? And then now you're in the reduced form, but you have to get it back to the oxidized form. So you're coupling to this dehydrogenase here, and you can see that you require, right, the FADH to go to FAD, but then that's coupled to NAD plus or to NADH. So you basically are coupling a set of oxidation reduction reactions in order to regenerate this reduced form so this reaction can happen again. Again, you will only need to know pyruvate, CO2, acetyl-CoA, and this final product, but all the cofactors and the arm. So this is another example of substrate channeling. The intermediate never leaves the surface, and they're tethered by this arm. So what would the benefits of this be? I'll try to take a few hands. We've talked about substrate channeling before. Why is it beneficial? Yeah. Yeah, so basically you make a product from the first part, it doesn't diffuse, right? And then it's basically effective concentration of the substrate would be very low. Instead, it's right there, so then you can use it and quickly turn over. Sometimes it's because it's toxic. It really speeds it up because you're just transferring it. It can't go anywhere else. It doesn't have to diffuse. And this is this other example of it, where it's tethered to the arm and the arm is transferring it. So this is a 3D image. It's also in your book, though it's not in your reader. I just wanted to show you it. These actually form huge complexes. There are many, many of each subunit, and in different species, they have slightly different subunit composition. So they'll still have E1, E2, E3, but they might vary the number and slightly vary the structure. So that E1, this blue here is that arm. So you could potentially see how the E1, right, would transfer the product, right, to E2, which could transfer it to E3. They're basically all connected, and this can move. So there's still active work going on about crystal structures for this complex using different types of approaches. Because it's so big, it's actually hard to crystallize and to look at. So even just doing a search the other day, there's still different crystal structures coming out and discussion about the different forms of this enzyme. So the next part of it is the acetyl-CoA oxidation. So this is the citric acid cycle. So acetyl-CoA is coming in, and then this is the first truly circular cyclic reaction that we're looking at, where it's all about actually regenerating, right, this oxaloacetate, which then is used with acetyl-CoA to make citrate. So it's a circular reaction, and what you produce is CO2, 2 CO2, and then 4 electrons, which go to these electron carriers. So if we look through this, we want to think about what's happening, and most of the lecture is all about this cycle. So there are 8 reactions, 7 are soluble, the last one is membrane bound. And then you have a C2 carbon that's entering, and then you have the release of carbon dioxide. And the whole purpose is, it seems almost like, wow, this is a lot of work, but chemically it can't happen just to convert acetyl-CoA or acetate to CO2. So you have to go through, and for the electron carrier, so you actually have to go through these rearrangements. A lot of it is about getting a nice carbonyl group, which we've talked about before. Again, for this class, we're not focusing on the exact reaction mechanisms and electron pushing, but if you're into that, it might actually help you with memorizing how this works. So the purpose is to get these electrons, and another part that we'll talk about is that some of these can also be pulled off the cycle and use as intermediates to make other things. So let's get into some detail here. So the first reaction is the citrate condensation. So this is a highly regulated first stage. Okay? So this is where you're combining the acetyl-CoA with the oxaloacetate, and you're using this is now coming off the CoA, and this is being transferred onto oxaloacetate to make citrate. You can see that the delta G is very negative, and that has to do with this hydrolysis. That's what's really giving you this really negative, irreversible delta G. So for these reactions, you'll need to know the product, the substrate, the product, the enzyme, and cofactor, but not the mechanism. So the next reaction, we're going to go over this more and more, is the aconitate reaction. And you don't need to know the intermediate here, but you want to know, right, that you're actually changing the position, right, of this HO group. So here, right, now you have a hydrogen, and now your OH is here. You've also, it's basically a rearrangement that's happened, as you can see here, and this is the intermediate. So in this case, this product is rapidly consumed, and that's what's driving it. It's not so much about the energy of the reaction as the fact that the product is rapidly consumed that's driving it. In the next reaction, you actually have to put in NADP. And so what you're getting here is CO2 is coming off. And when you have that, you basically, that will always be called a decarboxylation. But many times in this pathway, even when CO2 is coming off, the enzyme is not called a decarboxylase. It's typically called the dehydrogenase. And whenever you see dehydrogenase, it's about electron transfer. So you'll almost always see NADPH or NAD or FAD there, so that you can transfer electrons. So here you're actually reducing NADP, and you're forming, in the end, the alpha ketoglutarate. And again, this is highly exergonic, right? Delta G that's negative. So again, from here, you just need to go from here to here. Whenever you have, just as a principle, right, highly negative groups, you'll usually have stabilization by like manganese or magnesium. So those are the two divalent cations in the cell that typically will stabilize either this type of a negative charge or like we already saw the phosphates, like the pyrophosphate. So for number 4, again, for you guys, this will mostly just be going through it. So in this case, you have another dehydrogenase. So you're transferring an electron right onto NAD to have the reduced form, NADH, and you're putting on another CoA. So it's not easy to put on this CoA group, okay? This is a really big deal. And it looks like over evolutionary time, there was diversification of these enzymes to do slightly different things. So we talked about pyruvate dehydrogenase, how it was putting on the CoA, it had NAD as a cofactor, but it actually had 5 total cofactors, right? So they're not listed here, but they're all present, and they're used in a very similar reaction mechanism. So can anybody tell me what those cofactors are? Does someone want to? So what was the one for the CO2 that I talked about?
TPP.
Yeah, TPP. There was another one that can gain an electron or two.
NAD plus.
So we already talked about NAD. Yeah, FAD. And then the other one is right here, which is actually CoA in the reduced form. Oh, and then I forgot, lipoate, right? So again, it's really important in terms of moving the intermediates to the next part of the active site, okay? So that substrate channeling. So very similar, again, the book goes through this as well. It's really similar to pyruvate dehydrogenase. A way to look at it, right, if you're trying to remember which one, is that you're putting on this S-CoA group and you're getting off CO2. Very similar, right, to the pyruvate dehydrogenase reaction. It also has those same E1, E2, E3 subunits. They just have very slight changes that have changed their substrate specificity. So then reaction 5, this is the one where we're putting in typically GDP. So in this case, you have to put something, so in this case, basically, we're making GTP. There's another form of the enzyme that can directly make ATP, but don't worry about that. There's also an enzyme in the cell that can interchange ATP. So in your book, it'll often, or even in the overheads, it'll have GTP or in parentheses ATP, because they're basically functionally, from our point of view, they're functionally equivalent. So what we're looking at here, right, is we have something where GTP is being made. So we know that takes energy, right? So it's like, wait, how is this happening? Because we actually know we have to put in energy to make GTP. Well, the way it's happening is we're actually hydrolyzing this CoA, right? This thioester. So this is coming off the reduced form now of CoA, and you're being driven, and it's just slightly negative. In the next part of the reaction, you again have a dehydrogenase. So again, in this part, with the formation of this double bond, you have the electrons going to FAD. Remember that FAD can accept one or two, so in this case, you're having 2 electrons that are transferred, and you're making fumarate. This, right, is really almost at equilibrium. So when you have something, we'll go over regulation in a minute, that's mostly at equilibrium, you're driven by your substrate and product concentrations. Right? We're almost at the end, just a couple. So then fumarate goes to malate, and this is highly stereospecific. You don't need to remember that, you just need to look at this conversion. So in this case, right, you're actually then forming, you're going from that double bond to form the hydrogen and the OH group. And the positioning of them, which ones are in and out of the plane, it is highly stereospecific, and it's really positioned by the enzyme. Very low, very slightly thermodynamically favorable. The final reaction is malate that we just showed, going to oxaloacetate. So here, it's a dehydrogenase, and you see that there's electrons being transferred to NADH. So sometimes in like figures, it'll just say NADH, not plus H plus. It's always there. It's just that people aren't, like, in the past in biochemistry, you wouldn't actually always put plus H plus. So sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't, but it's always there in your mind, or physically it's always there, it's just not always showing up on every slide. So NADH plus H plus. And this is actually going very, this would look like it would not happen, right? So what we're looking at here though is the standard equilibrium, right, at 1 molar concentration. But what happens in this case, and this will go to the regulation that we're going to talk about in a couple minutes, is that oxaloacetate, right, it's the first start of the next round of the cycle, and it ends up that this is highly controlled, so there's very little of it in the cell. So it can be, often it's as low as 1 micromolar, and usually for the other things, right, we're talking more about like hundreds of micromolars, or even into like low micromolar. So in order for this to happen, it's really about having very low product and then these driving. So if we look at the summary of what's happening, sometimes I can't see it very well on my slide. So basically, you should be able, right, to look at this and say what's being formed, right? And without, like, let's say I gave you the cycle and then you had, but I didn't give you where NADH or CO2 or these were coming off, right? So from the dehydrogenase, you get an NADH. From this other dehydrogenase, you're getting an electron. From the malate dehydrogenase, you're getting an electron going into NADH. And then also from the succinate dehydrogenase, you're getting electrons going to FADH2. In this case, right, where you have the formation of GTP, which is hard to do energy-wise, it's coupled to the hydrolysis of the NH1, right, of the thioester. So you get 1 GTP, 3 NADH, 1 FADH2, and 2 CO2 molecules.
Yeah.
And the CO2s, when you try to remember it, could be a little tricky, but once you look at the structures, you'll be able to figure out where CO2 comes out, right? It's not obvious from the name, the decarboxylase, it's not actually, it's kind of often a subunit within a larger complex where they're just not calling it decarboxylase. So what you'll need to do is to be able to write these compounds, the name of the enzyme and the products, just like you're seeing here. So I already made this point that whenever you're thinking about, so transferring electrons to these molecules that store, right, this reducing power, NADH and FADH2 is really critical because that's what is turned into ATP in oxidative phosphorylation. And so the dehydrogenases are really important in that aspect of it. And we already talked again about the fact that each of those, right, are transferring electrons. So you can get out your iPad now. I'm trying to put them in the middle of the lecture. So just a second.
It's not A,
All right.
right? It's not A,
So we'll start now.
because you're actually doing FADH.
I think it's A.
I think it's
Really?
A.
Really?
Yeah, because you're putting in NAD plus and you're getting it.
Oh, I'm thinking the other way around, like they
Wait a
take
second.
away.
Okay, here we go.
You're right.
Instead of taking notes, put them in your head. Seriously.
I don't know if that's gonna work, so I have to write it out.
I'll help you. No, I'll help you for the
Alright. Alright, homie.
Because we gotta memorize this stuff.
Wait, do we have to know these values?
I
No,
don't
you don't.
think so.
No.
Just know they're
that
negative.
Yeah, the 3 negative ones. And then, do we need to know count the FADH and NADH? And
I think so.
At the end, right? Okay.
We put A. I was reading it wrong. I was like, wait, reduce? Oh, yeah. I answered it right.
Yeah, okay, so there are 3 enzymes and then 5.
Homie, I'm not even there yet.
No, this is that.
Oh, okay.
We need 5 coenzymes. First one is CoA from pantothenic acid.
Is that TPP?
This is, yeah.
TPP.
Yeah, this is TPP, thiamine pyrophosphate. This is lipoic,
Yeah.
lipoic, and FAD plus and NAD plus.
And
NAD plus-
coenzyme A.
Yeah, they are all coenzymes.
I think I have to.
NAD plus comes from niacin, riboflavin from thiamine pyrophosphate.
Okay, so this one, right, if you were following along the lecture, you could have a pretty good feel for it. And when I'm trying, I know there's a lot of memorization, but if you have a feeling for what the enzyme names mean and what they're doing, it'll really help you think about the chemical logic, not just right now what you're memorizing, but for the
Maybe
future.
money.
So,
donation.
good job.
Is there somebody we
And
can
now
just
I
tell?
will get out of it. Okay.
No, we don't know anybody. Sulfuric acid is it essential nutrient? No, it was not.
Lipoic acid.
Okay.
Function is
So
energy
they
production
reduce
because it's
electron
lipid.
carrier molecules. If you overthought this question, you might be thinking something about maybe they convert a single bond to a double bond. Some of them do, but in every case, it's about reducing electron carrier molecules. So for your practice, and it looks like I do have enough time to show you. I found this animation that I think will be useful for you for just as an additional way to practice. So I know I'm a little spastic up here, so I'm gonna go out of this and then show you it.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's just like a really simplified version.
No, that's what you need.
So basically,
You don't
this is from Wiley. They are a textbook producer, and they have this part on the citric acid cycle, which after lecture you can put that into your browser and do. But basically, they'll show the citric acid cycle, and then they show it the molecules being converted on a merry-go-round. And then the next part of this, which it won't let me to put right here, is that you have to place them on the merry-go-round. And then it'll, like, you can review it and go back. So I just thought this was like maybe another way that would help you to remember what's happening.
We're not doing
And
this
you
one.
could actually then draw, like for yourself, put like, well,
This
what
one,
enzyme
maybe
is doing
one
it.
hour
And
and a half.
if you
We
have
gotta go
your
to the last one. I gotta go
arrow
back to
on the
8, 9,
molecule,
10.
it'll actually then show you what it is. Let's see if it'll do it right now. Yeah. So as this is going around, unfortunately I can't get to the next button here, but as it's going around, you can then put your cursor over it and it'll show you the structure, and then you can put it in the enzyme, right? So this is a nice tool to use. So, yeah, move this up.
Pyruvate dehydrogenase. It is, right?
Yeah, and then there's magnesium in the middle.
Because it helps with the negative charges.
So just put this into your browser.
Stabilize
should be
it.
all
The
set.
negative charge is on there.
So the next
phosphate.
slide I removed because we're really focused on what's happening in mammals, even though I often mention other things. So
So this TPP?
I
TPP is
thought
in there
this
somewhere. This is
concept
Okay.
was
like, maybe you
actually
should
a
look
bit
at here.
confusing. So we're going to continue in aerobic organisms, the citric acid cycle. So we talked about it, right, in catabolism, right? So we were actually taking acetyl-CoA and oxaloacetate, but really pyruvate coming through and then converting it to CO2 and basically to electron carriers, right? So this was in a catabolic role. So it can also serve in an anabolic role, right, which is synthesis. So we're going to talk about that now. And if you see the word amphibolic, it means it could do both, right? So what about it in anabolism? So one of the things that you want to think about is if you have something, right, that's used for catabolism and going in this direction, like this, if its product is channeled, right? If you have one enzyme going to another one and it's channeled, it's not going to be available to be drawn off. So wherever you see something drawn off to be used in other reactions, it is not substrate channeled, right? And then for these, right, this is just showing you the variety of things that it can be pulled to. It can be pulled to fatty acids, it can be pulled to amino acids and purines, to oxygen carriers like hemoglobin, and then to other amino acids, aspartate, asparagine, and pyrimidines, and then finally through oxaloacetic acid to glucose through PEP or to these others. So in this case, I'm not going to actually have you memorize all the things it's going to, but just if I gave you a chart like this, you might be able to discuss some of the regulation, which we're going to look at next. So let's say that we're pulling off, right, these compounds to go to these other reactions, right? So if we're pulling them off to go to these other things, but yet we still need the TCA cycle to be functioning, we have to have a way of putting it back in. And so again, most of these terms are from the Greek. So in this case, the ana is up and the pluro is to fill. So you're filling out. So basically, hey, wait, you know, we were using oxaloacetate to go to make aspartate. So now we need to be able to put some in. And the same thing, right? So if you look at this, there are only two major places that we're having this filling occurring. It's at oxaloacetate and it's at malate. And a lot of this has to do with control of these pathways, which we'll look at a little bit more in the next slide. So you will need to know where these come in to fill it up, and then the enzymes that could potentially be involved. So let's look at those enzymes. So the major regulator is actually here. So if we don't have enough oxaloacetate, pyruvate can be converted to oxaloacetate by pyruvate carboxylase. And right, in order for this to move forward, it needs the pyruvate product, right, acyl-CoA and oxaloacetate. So in this case, this is actually activated, this enzyme, pyruvate carboxylase, is activated by acetyl-CoA. It also requires ATP. So all these ones that are being filled up actually require some form of energy, often ATP. So in this case, this is the major regulatory step here. And because the TCA cycle requires both acetyl-CoA and oxaloacetate, if you have a lot of acetyl-CoA, then it'll activate this enzyme to convert pyruvate directly into oxaloacetate to balance these two to move forward. Okay. You also have these other enzymes. PEP carboxylase is another more dominant one, and the kinase is not as dominant, and then also this malic enzyme. And they don't occur in every organism, so they all cost energy. The dominant one, like I said, is the pyruvate carboxylase. And then for us, we'll focus, the other ones you should know is the PEP carboxykinase, which is in heart and skeletal muscle, just that it can actually fill it back up, and then also this malic enzyme. So if we look back, right, we have the PEP carboxykinase, we have the malic enzyme, and we have the carboxylase. I think I said the opposite a second ago, so that basically for what we're talking about for animals, focus on the PEP carboxykinase. This is the very dominant one, the pyruvate carboxylase, and then the malic enzyme. So from here, we're going to look really briefly at regulation of the citric acid cycle. And a theme is emerging. So when you have a pathway, the reactions, right, the enzymes that are going to be regulated are usually those that have the really high negative delta Gs, right, that are irreversible, highly exergonic. And that's true for the citric acid cycle as well. So first, this is really should be labeled as 0 because it's the one coming in. This is right, highly exergonic, minus 33.4. And that's driven by that CoA as part of it and all those cofactors. And then the citrate synthase, isocitrate dehydrogenase, and alpha-ketoglucodehydrogenase are all highly negative. So if you were to see a brand new metabolic pathway, right, and I gave you different delta Gs for the enzymes, you should be able to say to me which one should be highly regulated, right? Okay. So this will be true for all of biochemistry. This is all about the chemistry of it. And so whatever cycle you're looking at, usually it's those delta Gs that are highly negative, typically irreversible, that are regulated. So now let's look at this. So the first thing is the pyruvate going to acetyl-CoA. So for pyruvate going to acetyl-CoA, I don't know if you remember the reaction. We can go back and look at it. But basically, ATP, acetyl-CoA, NADH, and fatty acids are negative regulators. A lot of these are actually products of the reaction. We can look back at it. All the way. Yeah. So if you look at this pyruvate dehydrogenase, it's just really, right, 3 enzymes, 5 cofactors, but you're getting pyruvate to acetyl-CoA plus CO2. But you also have, right, these. So basically, you're having limitation by NADH, and you're having limitation by FADH2, and if you have too much acetyl-CoA, you'll have limitation as well. So when you have this, it's actually product inhibition is what's happening. So we're going to go all the way back. So what we're looking at is mostly product inhibition here. Plus, there's also, it's not tough, there's also a positive, right, in terms of actually AMP, CoA, NAD+, and calcium driving it. We'll talk about calcium in a minute, but right, these are basically products would inhibit it, the substrates would promote it. Okay. There's also for mammals, there's also a phosphorylation, which is a covalent modification that regulates it, but we're not going to go into details of that. So this is highly, highly regulated. If we get to the next, so this is mostly by product inhibition, some by substrate availability, and there's also a covalent modification here. So if we look at the next one, we can move on to, for example, looking here at citrate synthase. Right, again, for citrate synthase, you have acetyl-CoA plus oxaloacetate to citrate, and you are being inhibited by the products, right? Citrate by ATP, succinyl-CoA, which is further down. So sometimes you'll have product inhibition by something that's like further down. So it's not really product, it's like a feedback inhibition. So when I use the word product, I'm usually talking about the product of that reaction, but you can also have something further down in the biochemical pathway that feeds back and regulates it. And then ADP can positively regulate this. So we can look back at that reaction, citrate synthase. Right, and so you can see here that that was highly reversible, and that if you had like a lot of the, in this case, right, if you have a lot of the CoA, right, you could be driving it. All right. So the next one to look at is actually here, isocitrate dehydrogenase. And this is negatively regulated by ATP and positively regulated by calcium and ADP. So in these cases, what these are really looking at is the energy level in the cell based on the whole reaction. So this is about allosteric feedback. So in this case, right, the whole point of going from glycolysis to pyruvate down to the oxidative phosphorylation is to generate ATP. So if we have a lot of ATP, right, it makes sense that these would actually negatively inhibit it. So again, negative, 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 right? And then the same thing about this specific pathway, the citric acid cycle, it's about making these reduced electron carriers. So we have a lot of them. We have a lot of NADH, right? Or a lot of NADH right at the beginning. Why do we want to bother going through all of this? So there's a logic to the inhibition. So this develops over time with evolution in the cell, but it's basically a way of fine-tuning and regulating the activity of the enzymes. So again, this is about the substrate availability, right? How much isocitrate do we have? And then about product inhibition, often, so here, succinyl-CoA, right, is negatively regulating it, and then about allosteric feedback, such as often by ATP, for example, or ADP. So what about the calcium? So we talked in our previous lectures about muscles, right, and that need to actually contract and to generate ATP, to need ATP, right? Not to generate it, but to need it. So calcium is actually a signal of muscle contraction and a need of ATP. So basically, if you have calcium, you want to stimulate this pathway because you need ATP. So calcium would act similarly to ADP or on its own. And again, it's acting at almost all of these levels. So here's calcium, here's ADP, calcium and ADP, calcium. So whenever we're talking about the need for ATP, right, we might need it for a number of different things, but one of the things that we already talked about was for muscle contraction. And then one more thing we want to talk about is this link to actually glycolysis. So citrates, so now we're going to go back a couple lectures, can actually inhibit the phosphofructose kinase 1 in glycolysis. And the reason is that if it has a lot of citrate accumulate, right, usually this is just moving through, but let's say that other things are regulating, right, these so that it stops and you get a buildup, so you have citrate. If that builds up, you have no reason to be going through glycolysis in the TCA cycle. So it's an indicator to the cell that you don't need to actually be doing glycolysis. You have sufficient ATP. Okay? So citrate itself can inhibit this PFK1, and then it keeps glycolysis and the TCA cycle in sync. So just to go over then for today, what you need to know. You want to know the pyruvate dehydrogenase reaction, all the products of that. You want to know the citric acid cycle well. How does it function to form biokinetic precursors? What would limit which substrates come off? How do you fill it up? And then the regulation, right? The exergonic, and then this idea of product inhibition and allosteric modulation.